This video is brought to you by Skillshare. For many reasons, I expect we'll see a lot of spirited debate about 12 minutes. Its ensemble voice cast, its Hitchcock-inspired key art, its unique top-down perspective, and its less than conventional story decisions all make for great gaming podcast fodder. You can ask 5 people what they think about this game and you're sure to receive no fewer than 7 or 8 opinions. I'll give you mine here at the top of this review. I did not like this. I did not like this at all, and that does bum me out. As someone who loves when games pull in talented voice actors, someone who values great writing, and someone who is, as I've mentioned earlier, a little obsessed with time loop games, 12 minutes felt like it was tailor-made for me. Unfortunately though, 12 minutes fell so flat in almost every critical aspect, from the voice performances, which lose so much of their power when they're crudely smushed into inconsistent dialogue options, to some very obtuse, inconsistent, and unclear puzzle design, to some frankly bizarre and unsettling story reveals that are, they're a lot. Critically, I think 12 minutes buckles under the weight of its own time loop. What is at first novel and intriguing soon becomes tedious as the game forces you to repeat the same actions over and over again and fast forwards through the same chunks of dialogue so you can experiment with a different dialogue option. Failure is welcomed at first, but quickly becomes groan-inducing as you become acutely aware of how many minutes and how many clicks you've just wasted. Coming back to what I said earlier though, I did not enjoy this, but I think plenty of people will love it. I really do encourage you to check out multiple reviews for this one because there's so many paths into this game and so many ways that it could hook you, but I think each one of those hooks could also be one of the things that makes you bounce off the title, which is what happened to me. At the very least, 12 minutes is going to leave an impression on you. Imperfect as it is, as much as I didn't enjoy it, I certainly give it credit for being bold and declarative and uncompromising and interesting. It is an interesting game, and that in itself is an achievement. Alright then, clock's ticking, let's take a look at 12 minutes. 12 Minutes is a time loop game. The protagonist, voiced by James McAvoy, arrives home on an ordinary evening to be greeted by his wife, voiced by Daisy Ridley. They share an intimate few moments together in their tiny one-bedroom apartment when suddenly a man, voiced by Willem Dafoe, bangs at the door claiming to be a police officer. He's heavy-handed, quick to apply force, and keeps asking about your wife's father's murder and something about a pocket watch. When the man doesn't get the answers he wants from your wife, he begins strangling you, and just as your world goes dark, the time loop snaps back and you appear back at your front door, ready to be greeted by your wife as you had been just a few moments earlier. This is essentially where the game begins, as it's tacitly implied that you need to do something, anything, to avoid that grim fate. What that is, though, is very unclear. This opening block is really the best part of 12 minutes because every minute in your 12-minute loop is filled with discovery, exploring space, exploring dialogue options, exploring the ways different objects can be picked up, combined, and utilized. Your agency is limited, but discovering all of the levers you can pull and the dials you can turn is very satisfying. The apartment in which 12 minutes is set is both a blessing and a curse. Its finite real estate reflects the finite nature of the game. It's a lounge room, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a closet, and the entire drama has to play out in these 4 spaces. On the one hand, the limited size of the environment quickly creates a sense of intimacy with the space and allows you to explore its secrets rather easily. This isn't a sprawling Resident Evil style mansion full of rooms you'll only visit once, or endless nooks and crannies hiding from view. It's a trio of tiny rooms, meaning it doesn't take you long to run your hand over all of it and feel like you have your bearings. On the other hand, these rooms are not as dense or secret-filled as you might imagine. I assumed that I would peel back the layers of each room as I peel back the layers of mystery, but that really wasn't the case. What you see is very much what you get here, and in the first 20 minutes or so you've discovered all of the ways you can interact with the environment, a few of the more challenging puzzles aside. After that, it comes down to interacting with your environment in the exact same way over and over again to set up the conditions for your next round of experimentation, which came to grate on me very quickly. Had there been more space to explore, or had the space been more dense or more filled with secrets, the game would have lost some of its intimacy and focus, but it would have become a more varied and engaging experience. Because yeah, this game definitely has some problems in the puzzle department. So for context, I got stuck in this game, so stuck in fact that I had to enlist the help of another reviewer who had finished the game, and he gave me solutions to like 3 of the puzzles, and I'd say there's probably around 20 things you need to figure out to get all 3 endings. The guy I was speaking to was also helping someone else who was stuck, and I spoke to a different reviewer who was also completely stuck at multiple points. Game journalist difficulty. Yes, that's very funny. I make that joke too, but for real, this is actually rare in this business since reviewers are used to finishing games without guides and it's generally fine. We just figure it out. I'm not surprised though to see that even in this limited cohort, people were getting really stuck. The problem with 12 minutes puzzles exists on 3 levels. A lack of objectives, a lack of clarity and consistency in the way that certain items, objects, and characters function, and a lack of intuitiveness on the part of the solutions. That's a lot of words, so let me explain. 12 minutes deliberately does not set up clear objectives for you to solve. Much like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, he doesn't get told, this is how you make the loop stop. He just has to keep trying different things until eventually something sticks. This is actually fine as an overarching design approach to 12 minutes, as it serves as a neat marriage of narrative mystery and gameplay objective. Within that broader goal though are a bunch of much smaller goals, stuff that unlock the next big reveal, enabling you to take these great leaps forward in the story. These are always really unclear, and at multiple points I hit walls where I'm just like, what the fuck does this game want me to do? I had exhausted what I thought was every single option and every single loop, and I simply didn't know where to go next, and the price of experimenting one way or the other was another round of failure, being forced to click through the same actions and the same dialogue options I had done dozens of times before. There is some guidance thrown at you at certain points, some lines of dialogue which are leading and they're helpful, but on numerous occasions, I just found myself at a loss for what to do next, not because I couldn't figure out how to accomplish my objective, but because I couldn't figure out the objective in the first place. Secondly, a lot of the puzzles really suffered from inconsistencies in how the game's objects or people would behave. So for example, there was one puzzle that I was so stuck on. It turns out that there was an item I had to interact with, but if I only interacted with it once, it didn't do anything. I needed to interact with it twice for it to trigger that effect. I'm trying not to be specific here to not spoil anything, but the point is, I could have chanced upon that through more rounds of experimentation, but I just never found that solution after like 10 plus loops. And so when I finally did find it after so much repetition, I was like, ugh. That is super annoying. Similarly, there's a really, really important moment in the game where I need to click on something, and I remembered looking at this thing when I first saw it and clicking on it, but it wasn't clickable, like the mouse cursor just doesn't do anything. So I'm like, okay, well that's not the solution, I guess. So I go through like 6 or 7 loops trying to figure this thing out when I notice this item has suddenly become clickable. That wasn't a bug, mind you. I learned this item is not clickable at a certain point in the conversation, but becomes clickable later on in the conversation, even though nothing happens to the item. It just, the game UI decides it becomes clickable. So I essentially just wasted 30 minutes because the game was not being consistent in how it let me interact with objects. By the way, I know this sounds super nitpicky, but you have to remember that you're going to be spending probably 5 hours in these 3 rooms with these 3 characters, listening to the same dialogue repeating over and over again. So this sort of myopic focus is really the whole point of the game. The last thing around unintuitive solutions is a really big one. So often I was just yelling at my screen like, just do this thing, just say this thing, but I couldn't. I think a key test for a dialogue-driven game is, does this game let me say what I want to say when I want to say it? And so often the answer to that here is a resounding no. There is one moment where my wife and the cop are discussing something, and they both ask this question of each other, and I have the answer to that question right there in my hands. Like literally I am holding it, and I'm dragging this object onto them to try and tell them the answer. But no, it turns out I have to answer that question in a separate time loop under completely different conditions in a moment that doesn't even make sense to do that. Everything I've just described to you is of course super subjective. I expect you will read plenty of reviews that say the puzzle design here is really clever and intuitive, and it'll test you, but it always feels fair. That is the nature of puzzle games. Some people will find them easy and they'll cruise through them. Other people will get stuck on 1 or 2 puzzles. That's just how these games work. My point though is not one about difficulty. My point is that so often I didn't know what the game wanted me to do, and when I did know, the things I was interacting with were not clear or consistent in their functionality, and the solutions required me to use those things in counterintuitive ways. One of the reviewers I spoke to about this game, Brody Gibbons from Press Start AU, shout out to you, buddy. He brought up the old LucasArts adventure games when we were talking about how obtuse some of the solutions to these puzzles were. I think that's a really good parallel because those games had some serious lateral thinking leaps required. I mean, some of the solutions in those games were straight up bullshit. But the difference was, with those, you weren't stuck in a time loop, and when you were stuck in full throttle, you could just sit there, clicking on shit, kicking shit, licking shit, and if none of it worked, that's okay, because you could just keep going until you figured it out. Here in 12 minutes, the clock is always ticking. Every minute that you waste clicking on things or trying new dialogue options is not only a minute spent there, it's also spending the time that you will use to get back to that point when you next fail. And that makes all of these challenges in the puzzle design all the more frustrating because you have to wade through so much repetitiveness for another chance to solve them. I said at the start of this video that 12 minutes buckles under the weight of its own time loop, and this frustration is ultimately what I'm talking about. The game doesn't build in enough shortcuts in either your dialogue options or your required actions to dull the edge that comes from a time loop this condensed, played out in a space this small and with so few characters. Games like Majora's Mask or Outer Wilds or the recent Forgotten City were all much larger in scale, so the time loop never felt frustrating because you would solve one puzzle and then you'd move on to the next space and the next cast of characters, the next wholly unique set of puzzles that were completely different from the ones you'd already solved. You kept seeing and experiencing new things in those loops, where here that is simply not the case. This is going to sound weird, but I wrote in my notes that playing 12 minutes didn't feel like playing any other time loop game I'd played before. It instead reminded me of Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, because it was very much about specific sequences being repeated, only to then make some minor mistake and finding yourself back at the start needing to repeat all of those sequences again. Put another way, playing 12 minutes feels like being Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, rather than watching Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. 12 minutes better communicates the frustrations of a time loop than it does the entertaining possibilities of a time loop, and for me that was something I just couldn't get past.
Police! I have a warrant for your arrest.
What is this?
Now! Don't move.
You can't just come in like this.
The voice cast of 12 minutes is pretty stellar. It's all top-shelf Hollywood talent. For that reason, I expect a lot of people will come to 12 minutes expecting strong voice performances and great writing. The voice performances absolutely deliver. There is not one line of dialogue that rings hollow. The problem is how these lines of dialogue are strung together. To illustrate this point, take a listen to this exchange. It runs for about a minute, it has some minor spoilers in it, but don't worry, this is super early in the game, and you're gonna find this stuff on like your second or third loop. Very easy stuff, so okay, here we go.
Well, what about your father's murder?
What is this? My father died of a heart attack, asshole. I don't want to talk about this.
I know the truth. The truth about the watch, your father.
What is this? All these accusations? We're done talking about this.
Hey, how'd your father die?
Well, that's a fun conversation topic. He had a heart attack. It was awful.
Did you kill your father?
Excuse me? No. Fun question, though. Real funny.
So what you heard there was two talented actors both delivering their lines, and each of those lines was believable, but the way the dialogue is structured in this game is constantly contradicting itself, and it swings wildly from one emotional point to the next, just like you saw in that scene. I'd already asked her about her father and his death, and she'd already shut me down hard and was clearly really annoyed at me. When I ask her again about her father's death, her tone completely turns on a dime. She sounds surprised that I mentioned her father, and she relays information information she just told me seconds ago, but she says it differently. She's also completely calm now, forgetting the fact that she was furious with me just a few moments earlier. There are many of these inconsistencies with how dialogue is pieced together, and the net effect is that these inconsistencies rob the actors of their power. Good actors aren't good actors because they can deliver single lines, they're good actors because they can combine those lines to build an audience towards an emotional outcome. Here in 12 minutes, the work the voice talent is doing is too often rudely interrupted by the video game form, because that form hasn't been well adapted enough to achieve what 12 minutes is trying to achieve. 12 minutes does position itself as a sort of interactive film, with its Hitchcock poster, its Hollywood A-list cast, its shining carpet reflecting in the clock face, the cinematic styling of its opening credits. If you're trying to create that experience, then the video game stuff has to move and bend more. It has to shift closer to what cinema does. Stuck here with these rigid dialogue choices that awkwardly pause the scene, full of options and reactions that don't adapt believably to the events that transpired seconds before, this cinematic aspiration is never realized. This brings me to the overall narrative, and man, I really wish I could talk to you about this one. Holy shit. It gets really wild at the end in a way that is sure to be quite controversial and will generate lots of discussion. Look, I don't like the choices it makes at its ending. The choice the writers have made here is so odd that you don't grapple with the story itself, you grapple with why these writers would choose to take things in this direction in the first place. Its final reveal is so shocking and so poorly explained that you can't really think about the substance of it. You can't view it from different perspectives and be like, oh, I see it from this perspective, but I also see it from... No, it's straight up shock value, and all you end up thinking is, what were these writers thinking? I really can't say any more than that, unfortunately, but you'll certainly know if and when you get there. With so many frustrating puzzles and so much repetition as a result of the time loop, and so many issues with the way this game handles dialogue, and such a weird ending, I cannot recommend this except as something that is interesting. And that's what I said at the start of this video, right? Like Necromunda Hired Gun. That's a cool game that I enjoyed. Will I remember it in 5 years? Probably not. 12 minutes. There's a game I didn't enjoy. Will I remember it in 5 years? Yeah, I think I will. I'll remember this tiny apartment, I'll remember this voice cast, I'll remember everything I had to do because it was drilled into me through sheer repetition, and I'll remember this fucking crazy ending. I don't take much enjoyment away from 12 minutes, but I do take those things, and that's more than I can say for a lot of other games I've played. Before we go, this video was brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people on topics including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. On Skillshare, millions of members come together to find inspiration and take the next step in their creative journey. Well, you might think that's all well and good, but that's not something I need, right? Well, maybe, but maybe you do and you just don't know it. For example, maybe you want to start doing some content creation, maybe about, I don't know, video games, but maybe you don't know where to start. Skillshare is the perfect place. You might want to check out this course that teaches you the fundamentals of how YouTube works. Maybe then you want to think about how to create viral content. When it's time to shoot and edit your videos, Skillshare has stuff for that too. Thumbnails matter a lot, and you probably want to learn how to use Photoshop, and Skillshare can help with that. And if you already know all of this stuff and you just want more discipline and structure to make content more often, Skillshare's courses are put together by experts in their field, and taking part in them allows you to connect with those creators and other students. You get to build a community around the thing you're passionate about, supercharging your ambition and creativity. To get started, click the link in the description below, and as an added bonus, the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thanks Skillshare for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down so I know to do better for next time. If you enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing, and if you really enjoyed yourself, maybe consider hitting that notification bell so you never miss a video. You can see my patrons here on the left. They're awesome. They're amazing. If you want to join them, check out my Patreon page. Thank you again. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.